as always, if you would like to skip straight into my analysis, you can skip right here. But this video is different than any other video I've done where I'm talking about movies. So I truly recommend you stick around. But again, you can skip here. Hi everyone, I hope you have had a good week. I've actually had this idea of a video, this idea of a possible series in my mind for a very long time. I just never got around to executing it, but I have finally got around to it. The series is going to be called Remake or Original. I can't tell you how many of these I'm going to make because it's just dependent on how the wind blows. But basically what I'm going to be doing is comparing the original movie to the remake. I'm going to be talking about similarities within the plot, differences within the plot, and honestly where I think possibly the remake is better than the original or the original is better than the remake. Now this is completely my opinion, so you can take it with a grain of salt. I only ever cover movies and TV shows that I genuinely like, so just know I'm never dogging out a movie or a TV show. If it's talked about on this channel, I like it. But funny enough, for today's video, our original is the 1999 Brendan Fraser's The Mummy, and we're going to be comparing this to the 2017 Tom Cruise's The Mummy. Now, the original movie is the one that I believe that came out in the 30s, but I did think that was a bit unfair to compare the 30s version to the 1999 or the 2017, simply because like the 1999 and 2017 are a bit within the same realm that it's easy to compare, versus movies were shot, filmed, and executed a lot different in the 30s. So I'm sticking to the 1999 and 2017. But I just want to let you know, I do in fact know that technically the 1999 version is not the original, but for the sake of this video, it is the original that we are going to be going off of. I bet you for the majority of us, it is the first iteration of the Mummy we all saw. Now, I should just say before we get started, the Brendan Fraser's The Mummy, the 1999 version, is my all-time favorite movie, has been for years. I have a scarab tattooed on me, not only because of the movie. I've always been into Egyptology my entire life, so that's another reason why. And I'm also wearing, you can't see most of it, but I'm wearing a t-shirt I got from the gift shop from the Mummy ride in Universal Orlando. So if you couldn't tell, I started this series with a movie I am passionate about. But this video is going to kind of have chapters, so you're going to kind of see how we break it down as we go. Second to last, because both of these movies are called The Mummy, I'm going to be referring to the 1999 version as 1999, and I'm going to be referring to the 2017 version as the 2017 version. Lastly, this is your spoiler warning. I am going to be talking about both of these movies in great depth. So if it's been a while since you've seen the movie, I recommend you go and watch them. They're both really good movies for different reasons. But yeah, let's get into it. First things first, I want to go through the plot of both movies with you, and then we are going to go into the Mummy story, and then we are going to go into the similarities between both of these movies. And then as a final button, I'm going to tell you my opinion on why I think one movie works better than the other. So starting with the plot of 99, our main characters are Rick, Evie, and Jonathan. And Evie, a librarian working in Egypt with her brother, decides to enlist the help of a man named Rick O'Connell to go to Hamunaptra, which at this point is a mythical city that is basically like a fairy tale. The reason that Evie wants to go to Hamunaptra in the first place is because she wants to look at the Book of Amun-Ra. So they go to jail to meet Rick O'Connell, and he agrees to take them to Hamunaptra if Evie saves his life, which she does. Through a few trials and tribulations, Rick, Evie, and Jonathan make it to Hamunaptra, and they are also at this point in competition with a group of Americans being led by one of Rick's ex-friends. During their few night stay at Hamunaptra, what basically happens is that Evie, Jonathan, and Rick end up finding a mummy, and the group of Americans end up finding some sacred jars along with the Book of the Dead. One night, Evie decides to steal the Book of the Dead from the group of Americans while they are sleeping, and she uses a key she got from Jonathan earlier in the movie to open the book. Evie reads from the book, awakening the mummy, whose name name is Imhotep. Awakening him releases a curse that Imhotep therefore has to enact, and he releases the 10 plagues of Egypt across the land. Our group, that being the Americans, Rick, Evie, and Jonathan, decide to team up to stop the curse that they released. Throughout the rest of the movie, the Americans end up dying because they discovered and took the sacred jars. They died at the hands of Imhotep. And Rick, Evie, and Jonathan end up teaming up with the Magi, who are a group of men who for generations have protected the land of Hamunaptra to make sure the mummy didn't wake. Eventually, once Imhotep has sucked the life out of all the Americans, he goes after Evie because he wants to reawaken his love Anck-su-no-Moon, and he has decided to use Evie as the sacrifice. He eventually takes Evie back to Hamunaptra, and at the end of our movie, Rick and Jonathan end up saving Evie, reversing the curse, making Imhotep human, and killing him, effectively ending his curse. It's so weird to do a plot summary like that because I just want to go into so much detail, but I have to hold myself back. Let's go into 2017's plot. Our main characters in this movie are Nick and Jenny, and Nick and Vale, who are two soldiers slash explorers, end up stumbling upon a mummy grave thousands upon thousands of miles away from Egypt. Nick ends up unknowingly releasing the mummy, whose name is Amenet, effectively cursing himself. While transporting the mummy's casket back to London, Vale ends up passing from a camel spider bite, becoming Amenet's minion. Amenet ends up crashing the plane, getting rid of every person that could have possibly survived except Nick. When Amenet gets to England, she ends up sucking the life out of a few men, which allows her to have enough strength to look for the dagger. A dagger that she needs to complete the promise that she made to Set, which is the god of death. Nick eventually makes his way to Amenet because of her mind control she has over him, and upon trying to sacrifice him the first time, she notices that her ruby is missing. So Nick escapes the situation, and throughout the duration of the movie, Amenet searches for a stone to put in the dagger while Nick tries to escape his fate. One of the ways he tries to escape is by enlisting the help of Protegium. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm sorry. Which is an organization that basically collects artifacts of various different degrees of not normal. They end up wanting to sacrifice Nick themselves instead of letting Amenet do it. So Nick and Jenny run away from them, leading them to these tunnels that are in fact the gravesite for English knights. And at this gravesite, at this crypt, Amenet ends up drowning Jenny, finding the stone, reuniting it with the dagger, and in an effort to save Jenny, Nick ends up plunging the dagger into himself, basically sacrificing himself to Set, the god of death. But instead of being completely taken over and becoming a vessel to Set, he overpowers Set and ends up sucking the life out of Amenet. Then he goes and brings Jenny back to life, and at the end of the movie, Nick also brings Vale back to life, and they journey through Egypt as Nick decides to travel the world to find a cure for his new condition. Moving on to the mummy stories, let's go to 99. I'm actually going to read this completely from my notes, so if you see me looking down, I'm literally just going to read word for word everything that I wrote. In Thebes, in 1290 BC, Imhotep, the keeper of death, is the pharaoh's high priest. Imhotep and Anck-su-no-Moon, who is the pharaoh's mistress, fall in love. They both take part in ending the pharaoh's life, and Anck-su-no-Moon takes the blame, ending her own life before the pharaoh's guard can. This act allowing Imhotep to escape. One of the reasons that she did this is because Imhotep has the ability to bring her back to life, which he attempts to do. Imhotep steals Anck-su-no-Moon's body, takes it to Hamunaptra, which is the city of the dead, and he takes her body deep into the city, then tries to use the Black Book of the Dead to resurrect Anck-su-no-Moon. Before he can actually finish the ritual, the pharaoh's guard stops him. The pharaoh's guard mummifies Imhotep's priest alive, then condemns Imhotep to the Hamdai, which is the worst of all ancient curses. The last thing we are told is that if Imhotep is ever resurrected, he will release the 10 plagues of Egypt. Moving on to 2017, Princess Amenet is the sole heir to the throne of Egypt till her father has a son, and he inherits her destiny. Vowing vengeance, she decides decides to embrace evil. She calls upon Set, the god of death. Set gives her power, and with this power, she ends up taking the life of her father and her brother. She also vows to Set to bring the demon into the world in the body of a man, and together they would take their vengeance upon humanity. But before she can sacrifice a man, giving Set a mortal form, what I believe to be the Pharaoh's men, it's not stated, stop her and mummify her for her sins. They bury her body far from Egypt, condemning her to eternal darkness. Now getting into the similarities between both of these stories. I thought this was interesting because this was one thing I was genuinely looking out for when it came to comparing these movies. While in 99, these are basically curses that Imhotep has no choice but to release. In 2017, it's framed as more so like Amenet just simply decides to do these things. These things are the powers that she possesses. I should also say the similarities category is not completely like word for word or bar for bar similarities. It's more of like a similarities and differences category of the actions that these villains take. So again, starting with 99. Of course, with being resurrected, again, Imhotep releases the 10 plagues of Egypt. The ones that we actually see in the movie are a horde of crickets, what I believe to be crickets. It's not stated, but they kind of look like crickets, and scarabs, the water in Egypt turning to blood, meteors, an eclipse. He basically condemns Egypt to darkness, the plague of boils and sores, which also makes the people of Egypt mind slaves to Imhotep. In comparison, Amenet is basically able to control animals and bugs. We see her use crows to take down the plane during the beginning of the movie, and when she's kind of going after Nick, she uses a horde of rats and bugs. But I believe this scene is more so in Nick's head, it seems like, than it is actually happening. So that's kind of why I was a bit iffy on including it, but still I kind of wanted to say it here. Also, when she has been caught by Prodigum, I can't say it. She also at this point uses more bugs to attack the members of this secret organization. Like I mentioned in the plot, Imhotep sucks the life out of men, but one thing I noticed is that in 99, Imhotep specifically only sucks the life out of the men who touch the sacred jars, which is one of the stipulations of him being resurrected, versus Amenet sucks the life out of random men that she comes across to regain her full strength. And I thought this was interesting because it kind of for me calls into question, like, can Imhotep or would Imhotep suck the life out of just anyone, or is it he can only specifically suck the life out of the people who touch the jars? Imhotep also chooses Evie to be his sacrifice to resurrect Moon. And one thing I want to talk about, and I will get into more later, is that the plot line where Imhotep wants to sacrifice Evie is actually completely separate than the plot line of his curses that he releases on Egypt. It's truly like two different things happening at once. He just decides to choose Evie because he wants to erect a Moon because he loves her, not because that is a stipulation of his curses. Versus in 2017, Amenet chooses Nick to sacrifice because she wants to sacrifice him specifically because she needs a mortal body for Set. That is her only motivation throughout the entire movie. Imhotep controls his priests, and he also controls hordes of living people with the plague of boils and sores. Of course, his priests are undead. Versus it seems like Amenet can control any of the dead, and anyone she also infects with her bugs. I accidentally cut myself off, sorry. In 99, the Magi specifically want to keep the mummy Imhotep at bay so that he doesn't release the plagues on Egypt, but once he actually ends up being released, their sole mission is to get rid of Imhotep to protect the world from him. Versus in 2017, the secret organization don't completely have an interest in saving the world from Amenet. Instead, they have an interest in sacrificing Nick themselves so that they can study him, and at one point they take Amenet captive so that they can also study her. One thing I noticed is that Imhotep commands the sands of Egypt to use it to take down a plane or kill our group trying to save Evie, versus Amenet uses the sands of Egypt to find Nick. Lastly, one saying in 99 that is repeated throughout the movie is that death is only the beginning. And in 2017, our movie opens with this quote, and it's, "Death is but a doorway to new life. We live today, we shall live again. In many forms, we shall return." Now, truthfully, like I've stated at the beginning, the 1999 version is my favorite movie, and I feel like 2017 was not received as well as I think they thought it would be. And the reason I say as well as I think they thought it would be is because you can can tell by the end of the movie they were clearly trying to set it up to be a series like the 1999 version. So I asked myself, why do I think 99 was successful where 2017 just wasn't hitting as much as 99? And so first I started with the characters, comparing Rick and Nick. Oh, I just I just noticed Rick and Nick. Period. Starting with 99, I feel like Rick is set up to be this likable character, honestly. The first hour of 99 is spent giving us a look into who these characters are. And through this first hour, we see Rick being someone who's confident, yet a bit clumsy. He's a gentleman and also, for lack of a better term, almost like a golden retriever boyfriend to Evie. Versus we only get a look at who Nick is before the core of the movie happens for about the first 15 to 20-ish minutes. And in these 15 to 20-ish minutes, Nick is portrayed as being cocky, calculated, a bit of a ladies' man, and a thief. And I mean, Rick is a thief as well, but I think how we see Rick interact with Evie makes him more likable than how we see Nick interact with Jenny. In 2017, we are shown that Nick and Jenny already know each other. They already have a sort of established relationship, and it is not a positive one because he slept with her and then stole a map from her. And so, like I said, while we watch both relationships grow over the course of the movie, I personally just had a harder time connecting with the enemies to lovers trope established in the movie that happens between Nick and Jenny. And believe it or not, that relationship that Nick and Jenny have is actually the crux of the movie. Jenny is helping Nick to survive so that Aminette does not kill him. And then eventually, at the end of the movie, Nick ends up sacrificing himself to save Jenny. But like I said, because their relationship wasn't built up from the start, it wasn't a positive relationship. And I feel like because Nick wasn't introduced as being a likable character, Jenny's want to save him and Nick's sacrifice do not hit as well as Rick traveling all the way back to Hamunaptra to save Evie. One thing that I also thought was interesting that I also mentioned earlier was that in 1999, Imhotep wanting to sacrifice Evie is honestly like a side plot. It's not even the main plot that's happening. The main plot that's happening is that our characters need to stop Imhotep and save the world. And I feel like in 2017, they took this side plot and made it the main plot. In 1999, even if they didn't have that side plot, the side plot of Imhotep taking Evie and them needing to save her, and they just had it where our characters were trying to stop Imhotep, the movie would have been good. It worked as a side plot and not the main plot. Versus in 2017, it being the main plot, I feel like is what possibly hindered the movie a bit. Next, moving into the motivations of Imhotep versus the motivations of Aminette. To be honest, I feel like they both had solid motivations. Aminette's motivation for what she was doing is that she wanted power that she felt was taken from her, versus Imhotep, he just simply wanted to bring his love back to life. The 10 plagues of Egypt was just a consequence of resurrecting him, but that's not what he was trying to do at all. But I like how they both demonstrated their powers over the course of the movie. And this is a side note, it has nothing to do with what I'm saying. I think it's very interesting that throughout the duration of the movie, Imhotep never speaks English. He only speaks like his native tongue, versus Aminette, she speaks her native tongue and then eventually switches to English. But before she even switches to English, she says it's a very simple language to learn, so that's why I'm speaking it, to communicate with you. She kind of ate with that one, not gonna lie. Also, getting into the eventual demise of both Imhotep and Aminette, I'm not gonna even be going into the resurrection of Imhotep that happens in the second movie. I'm simply going to be focusing on this first movie. For Imhotep, what ends up making him meet his demise is that Jonathan reads from the book of Amun-Ra, turning him human, and that gives Rick the ability to end his life. And to me, that makes sense. Versus in 2017, what ends up causing Aminette's demise is that Nick sacrifices himself to Set, giving himself Set's power, which allows him to suck the life out of Aminette, which on a basic level, that makes sense, but it also made me question. I'm like, if Set is the god of death, how is Nick so easily able to overpower Set? For me, it goes back into the love story that is supposed to happen between him and Jenny, because from the movie, we are supposed to interpret that Nick's love for Jenny is so strong that he is able to overpower Set. But for me, it honestly makes it a bit less believable that simply because of how much he loves Jenny, he'd be able to possess enough love to be able to overpower Seth. It would make more sense to me if Nick and Jenny were a married couple and have been married for a decade or so, and that's our establishing ground. So his love for his wife is what causes him to be able to overpower Seth. But again, with how their relationship was established in the movie, it doesn't hit as well for me. They also frame Nick as sacrificing himself for Jenny and resurrecting her to be his redemption for his actions that he has committed in the past. I have that written down here in my notes. But I mean, honestly, to me, with the last scene we see in the movie and how he interacts with Vale, it doesn't seem like he's completely necessarily learned anything. So for me, it doesn't truly feel like a redemption, if that makes sense. Versus for Rick, his driving force is that Evie saved his life. Like, Evie saved him from being strung around the neck. And so that's his first motivation for even going back to Hamunaptra with him, because he wants to keep his word. And then him going to Hamunaptra a third time at this point during the movie to save Evie isn't because at this point he owes her. It's because at this point he loves her. So to me, that makes a bit more sense, which it just all goes back to how Rick and Evie's relationship and how Nick and Jenny's relationship is established throughout the movie. Talking as an actor, it is important for an audience to grow a relationship with a character because it helps the audience want to root for said character over the duration of the movie. If the audience isn't able to establish that relationship, then they aren't necessarily going to care what happens with the characters. The last point I will make, which is a point I have here in my notes, we switched to my iPad. Ooh. I'll read directly from here. I said the element in 1999 where the good book, that being the Book of Amun-Ra, can defeat Imhotep makes sense because it means that anybody who accidentally resurrects Imhotep can in fact put him back to rest. You could replace the characters of Rick, Evie, Jonathan, and the Americans, and the same story can happen because it's boom, boom, boom. You resurrect Imhotep with the Book of the Dead, you can use the Book of Amun-Ra to put him back to sleep. Versus in 2017, Nick is the only reason that they defeat Amunet. So that left me with two questions, right? At the end of the movie, Nick basically almost breaks the stone. He starts to, and then she stops him. And my first question is, if he had completely broken the stone, would that have stopped Amunet? Would it have ended her? I don't think it would have, if that makes sense. I think she would have still been around, and at that point, she would have just released more havoc onto the world. She just wouldn't have been able to resurrect Set, but again, that's up in the air. My second question is, if Nick hadn't sacrificed himself to save Jenny, would anybody have been able to stop Amunet? I think it being plausible that anybody could have stopped Imhotep is a success for 99, and not knowing whether or not anybody could have been able to stop Nick is not a success for 2017. Overall, to summarize everything that I've said, where the original is successful is that the story of our characters that we get to know over the course of the movie is that they are people who made a mistake and decided to right their wrong. And along the way, some of them didn't make it, some of them almost got sacrificed, some people fell in love, and some people got away with treasure. And we have honestly seen this plot in some way, shape, or form happen multiple times. Versus in 2017, we have two thieves that end up releasing a mummy, and they are not necessarily trying to right their wrong. Over the course of the movie, the one thief, Nick, who ends up surviving, is trying to basically run for his life. It is not said or specified that he has any intention of righting his wrong. He is just trying to make sure that he survives another day. And Jenny, the woman helping him, isn't necessarily trying to right their wrong either. She is trying to ensure that Nick stays alive. And then eventually, because Nick decides that he loves Jenny enough, he sacrifices himself, not knowing whether or not that sacrifice is even going to work, because keep in mind, he could have sacrificed himself, completely been taken over by Set, and then released Set and Amunet onto the world. So it was just a long shot. It was just we got lucky, and he sucks the life out of Aminette, bringing back Jenny and then deciding to travel the world to find a curse for his new condition. And that is why I think 1999 hit a bit more than 2017. Though, again, I have rewatched both of them 45 times and I will continue to rewatch them because I think they're both good movies. It's just if you're comparing them, this is where one succeeds and one doesn't succeed as much. So yeah, that is what I think. I feel like I got all my points across. I hope this made sense. If it didn't, I'm sorry. But I tried my best. If you would like me to make another one of these, please leave a comment, leave a like, and I hope you have a good weekend, weekday, weeknight, and bye.